What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Lowkey OJ back with another video. How can a point guard like Chris Paul be destined to be not remembered, to basically fade into irrelevancy, to not be considered one of the best point guards in the NBA? A man who carried two franchises from irrelevancy to total relevancy and to even title contention, the later in the form of the Los Angeles Clippers. How can somebody like that, how can somebody of that caliber be considered irrelevant? A man whose lowest season in assists accounted for 7.8 and is always in the 2010 markup game in points and assists. There's no other point guard in the current era right now that you can look at and say that, yeah, this guy's gonna give me 20 points tonight, and also for sure I'm gonna get 10 assists, other than Russell Westbrook. Now you ask the question, so how is a man with a career average of 18.8 points, 9.9 assists, 2.3 steals per game, and 4.4 rebounds, how would he, with that stat line, be forgotten? There's many legends out there with very similar stat lines who haven't accomplished nearly as much as Chris Paul. How would somebody like that be accomplished? That's when we get into the conversation of the playoffs, where the stars and the superstars get spread apart. Now you could argue that Chris Paul has always been the best player on the team, and he's always done the most that he can, that he always shows up. Now that argument goes like this. We've never watched a playoff series with Chris Paul and said he didn't do enough. But the numbers can't lie. Men and women lie, the numbers don't. And with that, it shows Chris Paul as 0-3 in the second round of the playoffs. In 2012, the Clippers upset Memphis, and they were throttled by a superior Spurs team. The Clippers just weren't ready, was the excuse that was put out. In 2013, they lost to Memphis in a revenge game. Paul was good, but too often deferred instead of punishing the Grizzlies for wanting to make him a scorer. This was on him as much as it was on Blake Griffin, who was really beaten up by the Grizzlies' size and was still on his way to becoming the Blake Griffin that we know today. Fast forward into 2014, Paul made a series of mistakes in crucial games in a tight, tough series against the Thunder. He did average 22 points and 11.8 assists while shooting 50% from the field, and the Clippers outscored OKC by 10 points per 100 possessions with Paul on the floor. And that series was one of the most highly controversial series in recent memories. But still, Chris Paul was not able to get it done. Then fast forward into 2015, you can choose your narrative here, that Paul collapsed versus the Rockets after the Clippers led 3-1 completely, or maybe it was just Josh Smith coming up with those huge bombs of threes, those 4 bombs that completely killed them, and they dropped a 19-point lead, even though Chris Paul was injured in that series. You could make the argument that they should have closed out that game way sooner. Last but not least, there's a 2016 series when Paul suffered a broken hand and Blake Griffin re-aggravated his leg injury the same day, and it was revealed Curry would miss 2 weeks with a sprained knee. The window for the Clippers opened and permanently shut in the next 24 hours in that one. That one is completely understandable, and honestly, there's not many other players who could do anything in that situation. Not even your favorite player, MJ. MJ wouldn't be able to do anything if both him and Scottie Pippen were out of the game. So just to reiterate, we got in 2012, the Clippers just weren't ready. They were too new of a team and had too much hype behind them. In 2013, they legitimately got beat by a Memphis Grizzlies team that was just on fire and they looked like they could make it all the way to the finals. In 2014, they lost against a tough series against both Kevin Durant and Westbrook playing to their best of their abilities. And in 15, there was an injury and a fluke collapse versus a not-so-great Houston team, but they still should have been able to finish it off with a 3-1 lead. And then in 2016, that one is a complete pass because both star players on the team were injured, and honestly, what more could you really expect with having both your players out? Now you might be thinking, Lowkey, you're already setting up the stage to abolish Chris Paul for all of his failures in the playoffs. Just because he's been such a great player and he hasn't done well in the playoffs doesn't mean that he shouldn't be able to go down as one of the greatest players to play that point guard position. But let me just play a little bit of devil's advocate and bring up some other facts to the contrary. Now let's get back to the point of you never watched that playoff series with Chris Paul and said he didn't do enough. This, to the contrary, is false. Paul has individually failed his team repeatedly, either throughout getting outplayed by the other team's point guard or choking in the crucial moments despite plenty of help. Because think about it, when you have Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, even JJ Redick, Jamal Crawford coming off the bench, that's a lot of support. That's a lot of support. And if you're the best point guard in the NBA, you should be able to use that, utilize it to your best of your ability. Now going all the way back in 2008 Western Conference Final against the Spurs and the New Orleans Hornets, where Paul had a huge statistical series but choked in the most critical stretch of Game 7 with the season on the line. In the last 6:50 of Game 7, Chris Paul had 0 points on 0 of 2 field goals with 1 assist and 1 turnover. He also allowed Tony Parker to have 8 points in the fourth quarter, including the stealing shot in CP3's face. He let Jeremy Pargo had 16 points in the fourth quarter of Game 7. And now you're saying, well, Chris Paul, you couldn't have defended Tim Duncan because Tim Duncan was the Spurs' best player. But in that very same game, Tim Duncan was held to 2 points in the fourth quarter by Tyson Chandler. Tyson Chandler was still at the peak of his game at this time. The New Orleans team had a very nice team, to be honest, and they definitely could have won that game. Now you could still debate the fact that Chris Paul didn't have enough help in that series and he was still a young and inexperienced point guard. But in the 2012 Western Conference Final game, you couldn't make that same excuse because Chris Paul was supposedly the leader of that team, was being touted as the best point guard in the NBA, had already blown pundits away as him and Darren Williams, the battle between those two, it was obvious that Chris Paul was the better point guard. So how would you explain him being the third best player on his team in that series? Because Blake Griffin was putting up 21, 8, and 2. Bledsoe was putting up 13, 3, and 2. And Chris Paul on 70% of the field in 22 minutes, 16 minutes less than Chris Paul. And Chris Paul in 38 minutes a game was putting up 13, 4, and 9 with 4.5 turnovers a game. So that season, that series was lost because of Chris Paul. Forgetting all that happened back in that series, some people can make the point that Chris Paul came back really strong the next season and really was the main catalyst. Like, he was not at fault at all for the next season and the reason why the Clippers went out. But the season after that, in 2014, not even in the second round, Chris Paul had troubles with Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors, where he was mainly just carried because Andrew Bogut didn't play without injury, and that's mainly the reason why they won. And he's supposed to be the reason why they carried the team. But Blake Griffin was the reason why they won that series. Blake Griffin was the reason why in 2014 they were even in the Western Conference Final game. And in that Western Conference Final game, Chris Paul, he didn't play that bad. He was putting up 23, 4, and 12, and 3 on 51% of the field. But Westbrook outplayed him in the clutch and eventually the deciding game, further cementing that Westbrook outplayed him for the series. I mean, if Chris Paul hadn't choked like that, the Clippers would have been up 3-2 with Game 6 in LA. If you're supposed to be the big dog, you're supposed to be able to handle your business, and he was not able to handle their business. He was not. Not to forget, his overall playoff stats are inflated due to the fact that Chris Paul has played 8 out of 12 playoff series in the first round. So if you play 2/3 of your career in the first round, you better have good stats, considering you don't have to maintain your productions for more games per playoff runs. T-Mac had 37-7-1-1 on 43% shooting in Orlando and Houston's playoff years, all in the first round and with less help than CP3 in those years. Any of the all-time top 15 point guards would have the same playoff stats as CP3 under ideal statistical circumstances, most of them with even better numbers. Rod Strickland was just as good as in the playoffs as Chris Paul during his brief prime, if not better, while benefiting from the first round inflation. For example, Rod Strickland in 1994 to 1997, he was averaging 21 points per game on 45% shooting from the field, 5.1 rebounds, 9.5 assists, and 2.9 turnovers per game. And Chris Paul from 2008 to 2016, all of the playoff games, he's been averaging 21 points, 48% from the field, 4.7 rebounds, 9.4 assists per game, and 2.7 turnovers per game. Strickland also played two championship teams in the 1994 Rockets and 1997 Bulls, whereas none of the teams that beat Paul went on to make the finals. So Strickland put up the same or even better stats against a way more stat competition with less help from prime Rod Strickland. Prime Rod Strickland over Chris Paul in this situation. Now, all this isn't to say that Chris Paul isn't a great point guard or even the best point guard of this era. It's just to say that when it's all said and done, Chris Paul is not one of the point guards that should be on the Mount Rushmore of point guards. Maybe he's a middle tier grade, but I would not say he's like one of the greatest to ever play the position. Those places should be reserved specially for players who have done more than just, put up numbers. You have to get rings. That's why rings are such a big conversation piece. That's why LeBron James isn't regarded as a better player than Michael Jordan yet. If this season he's able to defeat the Golden State Warriors again with Kevin Durant and the deep team that they have, plus along to that it'll be his 8th year in a row in the finals, then definitely I would put him as a better player than Michael Jordan. I don't think many people could argue about that. Like, really, what's your argument to that? What would be your argument to that? Hey guys, if you like that video, if you got any different opinions on whether or not Chris Paul is gonna go down as one of the greatest point guards in the NBA, shoot me a comment. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you'd like more of this type of content, hit that subscribe button. And I really want to see some discussion on this, so if you really like the video and you want to see some discussion, hit that share button. And that, I'll see you guys in the next video. You're still here, so hit that like button. Just hit it, man.
Thank you, Kevin. Here with Chris Paul. And Chris, the first half, plenty of assists, lots of points up on the board. What are you seeing out there that gives you the confidence to make so many plays?
Well, one of these games is very up-tempo, fast-paced, and, if they just run, I have fun, assisting and passing on the ball, so it's a fun game for me.
You have
Paul. He notched his season high, and his scoring really seemed to set the tempo for his team tonight.
It was a stupendous night for him from long range. Having him out there on the perimeter took a lot of heat off their guys inside, and it gave them room to operate in the paint.
You know what? He's a total package as a floor general. There may not be an official ranking for the best leaders in the league, but if there was, CP3 would be right at the top of the list.
And that brings us to the end of our broadcast for this evening. For Kenny Smith, Shaquille O'Neal, Kevin Harlan, and our illustrious 2K Sports crew, this is Ernie Johnson saying good night, and we'll see you again soon, but not soon enough.